Welcome to my latest chat. And I want to thank the audience on Facebook, the audience on YouTube, and the audience at paltalk.com for joining us today. Today, my guest is Reuven Kahane. Now, Reuven is an ordained rabbi. He doesn't make a big deal about that, but he is. In real life, he's a lawyer and he's in real estate. But I wanted to bring him on because he has some strong feelings about houses of worship that are defying orders, and not just Jewish, but we've seen it in the Christian churches. We've seen it in the mosques, defying the orders to not congregate, claiming that they have the First Amendment right to hold their church or mosque or Jewish services. And of course, this comes at a very inopportune time for the Christians and the Jews, because we're going into the holy season for the Christians, Easter. We're going into Passover, where the Jews get together for Passover seders and gatherings to remember the exodus from Egypt of the Jews, of the Israelites. And it's very difficult to balance out the need for public health and the desire to continue to worship our faiths at a time when people feel like they need faith perhaps more than ever before in their lives. So joining me now is Reuven Kahane. Reuven, thank you for joining us on Facebook, Pal Talk, and on YouTube. Love having you with us. So you have a position that's contrary to that of those in the Orthodox Jewish community and in the Christian community and in the Islamic community, who believe that they ought to be gathering together in houses of worship.
No, I don't think it's contrary today, because right now the majority, even the 99%, have shut things down. So if one is to say contrary, it's only contrary to maybe the 3 or 4 synagogues that have remained open out of the thousands. The 3 or 4 evangelical preachers who have remained open, a couple of Muslim gatherings here and there. At this point, I think everything has shut down. I think if you look 5 weeks ago is when really this whole thing started. The issue of whether it was in the Catholic, Christian church, the Muslims, the Jewish community. At that point, there was, I think, a lot of questions and a lot of disagreements of how quickly things should be shut down. At this point, I think it's the extreme outliers of every religious denomination that are keeping things open. I wouldn't even say they're outliers. They're crazy. They're nutcases. But real controversy was happening about 5 or 6 weeks ago, till about 3 weeks ago. And I think all the communities just came a little late to the game. They got, as they say, the memo a little bit late, but I think so did America. A lot of people said that the president was late in the game, a couple of weeks too late. So I think, the Jewish community followed the same, you could say, misinformation, or didn't get the right information sometimes. That's in some parts of the community, and in some parts of the community, I like to call it arrogance and ignorance. Maybe there was a couple of rabbis here and there who were a little arrogant and thought they knew more than the politicians or the doctors. And then you have the ignorance of the people who, were following blindly. But again, I think we're talking about a small minority. At that point, a couple of weeks ago, that minority might have been 10 to 15%. Today, you're talking about an extremely small group of outliers who are still congregating, whether it's in churches, synagogues, or mosques, and putting other people at risk.
Reuven, with the Christians, I think if 2 or more gathered in his name, there is love, they believe. With the Jews, you're supposed to have 10 guys, a minyan, and 2 is not such a big deal, but 10 is problematic. How do you get around that religious dictate among the religious Jews that says you have to have 10 people together in order to properly pray?
So the one Jewish law called pikuach nefesh, which is saving a person's life, or putting a person's life at risk, that stands above all other laws. It's in Vayikra, Leviticus, and it stands above everything. That's why if somebody had a heart attack, you would call the ambulance, and the ambulance on Shabbat, on Yom Kippur, would take you to the hospital. There's not a doctor in the world, there's not a rabbi in the world who would disagree with that. The Israeli army basically has an army based on that premise. You have thousands and thousands of religious soldiers who are based on the premise of pikuach nefesh, of saving one's life, and there they feel that they're saving Jewish lives, are participating in the army. So that law, stands above all other laws, including having a minyan, including having a quorum to make those prayers, to say those prayers. The way people are working around it is they're having these minions, Zoom videos, and so on and so forth, which really, I think it's more of a spiritual side that they're doing it for. They're doing it more to keep community together. In terms of real Jewish law, it doesn't get around having to literally be in the same room to see the people. But I think on a spiritual side, to keep community going, that's what people are doing. But there is no way around it. It's just that the law of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, overrides every other Jewish law.
So the authorities are very serious about this. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, says if you continue to have a service in a synagogue, and for the uninitiated in the Orthodox community, a synagogue does not necessarily mean a standalone building. It could actually be a house where the rabbi lives, where they hold the services. So that makes it a little more difficult when it comes to the enforcement. We have seen several pastors, one in Louisiana, one in Tampa, who have been arrested for. Is that going too far to say we're going to shut you down, we're going to arrest you, or really do they have to do this in the interest of the public health of all of us?
Okay. Let's talk about the constitutional issue just for a second of shutting down a synagogue, a church, or a mosque. And it's very hard to do that because the First Amendment gives you freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. You need a compelling reason to shut them down. In this case, the compelling reason is the first rule of government is the safety and of the health and the welfare and the safety of the citizens. So that is why they can shut these synagogues and churches down. It's very, very tailored narrowly. You can't be too restrictive, and you have to be even-handed. So you wouldn't be able to shut down a synagogue and not a church. Actually, if they left the restaurants open, the synagogues would be able to say, we can stay open. So by only having things like hospitals stay open and supermarkets, it actually strengthens the argument because it says only life-saving kind of institutions can stay open like a hospital. So the government can shut it down. They can do fines. They can close them for the period of time they are supposed to be closed. What de Blasio did, interestingly, which he was wrong to do, was he said, we're going to permanently close you down. And that is 100% not allowed based on the Constitution, because you can withhold constitutional rights after the fact and punish someone by withholding their constitutional rights. So he cannot permanently close these synagogues and churches down. He can fine them a lot. He can actually put some of the pastors and the rabbis in jail potentially, but he can't permanently close them. And de Blasio, who we all like and dislike, we should remember he was the one who didn't close the public schools until he had to close the public schools, and everybody told him to close the public schools. So it's just the one point that he went too far of closing them permanently, according to all constitutional lawyers. I'm not a constitutional lawyer myself. He would not be able to do it.
We have a comment here from Ronald Dwyer. Let's see if it shows up completely. Yes. He says, and Ronald, I caught your Facebook Live earlier today, by the way. The United States Constitution prohibits any interference in the practice of religion. Most religious organizations have chosen on their own, which is the right way, do not hold public services, but to hold services online. To prohibit any exercise of religion would be a violation of the First Amendment. So he disagrees with you.
Yeah, he's wrong. In the case of 1990, which was Division of Employment against Smith, it was actually a argument where the American Indians want to use peyote, which at that time was a banned substance, like marijuana, and the government won. And they said religion does not override the compelling government's responsibility of health and welfare of their citizens. So he's right about the First Amendment, but he's wrong that the government can't do it. The government wouldn't be able to do it right now. The Supreme Court would right now be stopping these regulations of enacting or closing it if that was the case. But in a compelling time like this, where a pandemic 100% can cause death, the government 100% can do it. And if they did an emergency decree, which they're doing in Israel, you're actually cutting through the red tape and you're able to do it much, much quicker. So you don't have a freedom of assembly and religion and then to go kill people. There's limits to all amendments in the Constitution and the First Amendment. You can't have an assembly where you're, killing people or killing children or killing old people. It doesn't override everything.
The analogy that I've been using, I don't know if it's really a fair one, but it's the best I could come up with, is that there are occupancy limitations in all buildings where there are public gatherings, whether it's a bar, a restaurant, a supermarket, a theater, and a house of worship. And let's say I have a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a Buddhist temple, a Hindu temple, and the capacity is 100 people, and I have 250, 300 people jammed in there. The fire marshal has the right to come in and shut that service down right now. Get out of the building, because if there's a fire, people are going to die. That's not violating their First Amendment rights. That's protecting their lives.
Yes, 100%. I don't know, his name is Mr. Dwyer. It is limited, and the standard is under extreme scrutiny. So it has to be limited, even-handed, limited. So it's not easily enacted, these kind of things, where you close it down. And courts look at it very seriously, whether it's the federal courts or the state. But in this particular instance, there is no question about it that you can shut these synagogues and churches down and not not allow people to have more than 2, 5, 10, whatever the amount of people it is.
I want to narrow this to specifically the Orthodox Jews, because I'm curious. I'm not an Orthodox. I'm Jewish, but I'm not Orthodox, obviously. But it is of interest to me, of course, and that is the Orthodox Jews believe that on the Sabbath, Shabbat, you can't operate anything electronically. The churches have gotten around this problem, a lot of them, including St. Patrick's Cathedral right here in New York City, by broadcasting their services, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on Zoom. Can the Shabbat services be held online or not?
What some of the Orthodox synagogues are doing is they're doing it, sort of on they're doing it an hour or 2 hours before the Sabbath, so that people have a feeling of the Sabbath service. Mm-hmm. But it's not something where you can go against the Sabbath laws to have that. We go back to the Pikuach Nefesh. We go back to saving a life. That's something that one can do to go against the commandments of the Sabbath. But something where you have to do it and then you can use electronics, it's absolutely not. Now, during the week, people are using the Zooms for the services, and all the Jewish day schools actually are learning, on the Zoom and on the Hangouts and the Facebook, the FaceTime and so on and so forth. But it's the Sabbath, which you cannot go against the commandments. Interestingly, it's the Passover is what people are talking about most now, because it's such a familial event. And right now you have grandparents and uncles and aunts who are going to be by themselves. And that's a big question that people are asking. Can you have a Zoom Seder? Can you have a Zoom, on Passover? And actually a couple of rabbis that said out of Morocco said yes. The other rabbis all said no. And it's just because, people would be pressing their computers and so on and so forth. I suppose if one non-Jewish person opened the Zoom for everybody, there was no chance that anybody was going to touch a computer, so on and so forth. Maybe it would be the case, but according to all the Orthodox rabbis, you can't use the electronic devices on the Sabbath or the Passover.
Well, from my point of view, I don't fully understand that prohibition, and I feel that it's a shame that it can't be waived so that people can get together and congregate virtually. But I mean, I understand that people want to adhere to the rules. I just want to say that we have to underscore, when it comes to the Jewish community, we have seen spikes in Jewish Orthodox communities We've seen it here in New York. We've seen it here in New Jersey. My old hometown, Motown, Detroit. The spikes are in Oak Park, West Bloomfield, and Southfield, where there are a lot of Orthodox Jews. And I made the comparison with you, Reuven Kahane, on the phone the other day, that this is not dissimilar to what we are seeing in Italy, where there are multi-generational people living together in close proximity. And I think that's an additional issue that the Orthodox Jews have to deal with.
Right. What happened? Why there's such a spike? And it's a very large spike today in Israel. According to some statistics, 50% of the coronavirus incidents right now are Orthodox Jews, who represent 10 or 12% of the country. And the reason, and here in New York, in Borough Park, Williamsburg, Lakewood, Westchester, New Jersey, that you have so many cases, I think it's a few-fold. It started out early. The holiday of Purim came, and that was before anyone sort of knew anything. And already you had the big celebrations. Purim is like the Mardi Gras, you could say, for the Jewish community. That started it out a little bit. And then you had, I don't want to say misinformation, but, you know, a lot of the Jewish Orthodox, a part of them listen, sort of, a lot of them, first of all, don't have internet and television. So they're getting their news late, or they're only getting their news from their own sources. So the news came in a little bit later. There's a small segment of the community which has actually a distrust, more in Israel than America, of the government and the press. Sort of like the liberals today, or excuse me, the right wing has a mistrust, or the people on Fox don't like CNN, CNN doesn't like Fox. So there's a segment there which has distrust of the press. Now you put all that together, and I think the Jewish community got a little bit late to the game, but I don't think that's the big issue. The big issue is what you said, that the Jewish community is like Italy times 100 in terms of their familial and cultural ties. So the positive of the Jewish community is what has sort of turned this into the Jewish people almost being the epicenter of this pandemic here in New York. You have very large families, 3 to 8 kids sometimes. You have, one brother's living next to another brother, next to another brother. So you could have 50 to 60 people within, one building in Williamsburg, or within a couple of houses in the 5 towns or in New Jersey. And then you have parents and uncles and grandparents living together. You don't have that in many communities. I lived in the Bay Area near San Francisco, and you'd have one person living alone, and they haven't seen their grandparents in a while, and they have a brother in Michigan and a brother in Wisconsin. And you come to the Orthodox community, and every single Saturday, the lunch or the Friday night is 30 to 40 people together. That's not very frequent. And then also you had, again, at the beginning, you didn't have weddings of 30 people. You have weddings of 300 people. You don't have funerals of 100 people. You have funerals of 1,000 people. So that cultural and familial ties, which is in a lot of other groups, insular groups, I don't want to say it's just the Jews, but specifically within the Orthodox Jewish community, that positive has turned, unfortunately, into a very sad negative.
Let's hope that this does not lead to what we've been dealing with on the streets of New York and New Jersey before the pandemic, a rise in anti-Semitism, which obviously, once again, would be very misguided. But I have a little bit of a concern that might happen as a result of the facts as we've been presenting.
Well, it happened in New Jersey without any excuse.
Right.
You can always find excuses, and they always have, through the ages. This is just another one, but I don't think it's the anti-Semites don't need an excuse. They never did.
Sir, as soon as we are able to meet in person, I'm going to take a little walk from the Fox News headquarters to your neighborhood, because boy, oh boy, I need the exercise. I haven't been exercising properly. I'm afraid when this is all over, I'm going to be looking like Santa Claus. I got to watch it. That's one of the things we should be doing as well, as figuring out a way to exercise at home. Reuven Kahane, thank you very, very much for joining me today and giving us your insights.
It's a pleasure. Anytime. And some of the Orthodox Jews watch your show, you should know. And they love your show, and they're always on the internet. And they really love your show and appreciate your show and everything else you do.
Yeah, well, when I was working at 1010 Wins, it was quite interesting, because when I went into the Orthodox community, they go, Oh, Baumgarten. You know,
they all watch your show.
They all watch. Hey, thanks a lot, and we'll catch you later.
Pleasure.
Stay safe. Okay.
So much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Now, for the folks who are watching on Pal Talk, I'm gonna hang up here on Facebook, and I'm gonna join you over there on Pal Talk. For those of you who are watching live on Facebook, you could go to paltalk.com. It's a free download, and then join us in the Pal Talk Global Newsroom. For a second there, I forgot the name of the room. How could that be? Okay, and until next time. Oh, by the way, tomorrow, Brian McNally from a company called Stryka is going to be joining me at 5 o'clock New York time. I want to bring some positiveness to all this, and his company is actually doing very well despite or maybe because of the pandemic. So that's going to be a very interesting interview at 5 o'clock New York time tomorrow. And until the next time we get together, as I always like to say at the end of our gatherings, peace out.